Okay, at this point, we've followed traits according to Mendel's rules, which means that they're monogenic, coded for by one pair of genes, and that means that you get one from mom, one from dad, so you always have two alleles, and the possibility for those alleles is either dominant or recessive. And now what I want to do is I want to take a look at what happens when you follow two of those traits at the same time. It gets pretty cool and pretty crazy. We're going to follow two traits, red hair and freckles. Red hair is dominant. Not having red hair is recessive. Having freckles is dominant, but not having freckles is recessive. And I'm going to use a cursive F just so that we can tell the difference between the dominant and the recessive. All right. If somebody was pure for red hair and having freckles, their genotype would be big R, big R, big F, big F. Homozygous dominant for both traits because their parent gave them two dominant alleles. That's why they're pure. If somebody was pure for not having red hair and not having freckles, they would be, homozygous but recessive this time. So we would represent that little r, little r, little f, little f. When those two people got together to have kids, there is absolutely, without a doubt, no question that their sex cells would carry the dominant alleles in this person and the recessive alleles in this person. So we're taking a look at what the sex cells could be. And I'm just attributing one to be egg and one to be sperm. We really don't know. Remember that the sex cells have to contain half the genetic content because when fertilization happens to form that zygote, the offspring will carry a dominant allele for both traits and a recessive allele for both traits. We would say that that person was heterozygous for two traits. So, what would happen if two people that were heterozygote got together to have kids? Well, let's take a look at what would happen. Okay, here are the two people that are heterozygote. So they both have red hair and freckles, but they're, what's the word that means that they have it but they don't show it? Yep, they're a carrier. So these two people have red hair and freckles, but they're carriers for not having red hair and freckles. The possibilities for what could happen with the offspring with just respect to these two traits is pretty big and pretty possible. So what we're going to do is we need to figure out all possible allele combinations in each parent so that we could figure out how many different possible combinations could go into the sex cells. So here's how we do that. You have in math class learned how to FOIL things. We're going to FOIL, but this time it's not the distributive property in math. We're going to FOIL alleles. I want you to watch because we're going to do it twice. Watch. And what does the F remember? The F means first. So in meiosis, when sex cells get formed, the first two alleles could possibly go into one sex cell. Cool. What's the O? First outer. So we take a look at the outer alleles. So big R, little f. First outer I. Inner. So the inner alleles could perhaps get combined. F-O-I-L. Last. The last alleles. So little r, little f. Before, when we did this with our sex cell formation, when we were just following one trait, we were going to have only two possible combinations. So our Punnett Square had a 2 by 2 formation. Guess what's going to happen with this next Punnett Square? You got it. It's going to be 4 by 4. Now, it sounds like a lot of work, but don't worry, it's going to get easy. Remember, The more you do it, the easier it gets. So we have to figure out what the possible combinations could be for this next parent. Now it just so happens that both parents have the same genotype, so you're going to get the same end result, but I want to go through it anyway, just so you can be sure you understand the whole FOIL thing. So I'm going to do it with you. First, big R, big F. Outer, big R, little f. I, inner, little r, big F. Last, little r, little f. So that means that we're going to have a pretty big Punnett square. So we need to create a Punnett square that can accommodate all of these possible sex cell combinations. I hope you are taking notes to accomplish the very same thing. Remember that the Punnett squares are used as a tool to help predict what the potential offspring could look like. So if these were the eggs, and again, it doesn't matter which side, and these were the sperm, we would take a look at what happens if this sperm fertilizes this egg. Red hair, freckles. If this egg was fertilized by this sperm. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I am going to complete this Punnett square while you do the same. Okay, we got a lot of information up here. Now I have to tell you, remember the last time when we did just the 2x2 Punnett square, we had some ratios. Thankfully, you don't need to worry about genotype ratios. But this time we're going to take a look at phenotype ratios. And when we look at phenotype ratios, there is a certain order that we follow when we look at phenotype ratios. So when we take a look at our phenotype ratio, we want to take a look at how many are dominant for red hair, dominant for freckles. Then, how many are dominant for red hair? Because all along we've let red hair be first. How many are dominant for red hair, recessive for freckles? How many are recessive for red hair, dominant for freckles? And this really can be a big R. And then how many are recessive for both red hair and freckles? Okay, so I need to go through and I need to count. I need to tally. So in order to do that, just to make sure that I don't get confused and count squares twice, I'm going to use a different color pen. This is red hair and freckles. Red hair and freckles. So dominant, dominant. How many show the dominant trait for both ones? Done, done. Red hair, freckles. Red hair, freckles, because the dominant allele, remember, always shows. That's Mendel's principle of dominance. Up here, red hair, freckles. So slash, 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 4 times the 5th one gets a count. So counted that one. Red hair, no freckles. So red hair, dominant, no freckles is recessive. Red hair, freckles. Red hair, no freckles. So I am going to make sure red hair, no freckles, dominant, recessive. So count that one. So I should have 8 by now. I do. So I've got to do that tally to make sure that I keep track of things. Red hair, freckles, dominant, dominant. Red hair, freckles, dominant, dominant. No red hair with freckles. That's recessive, dominant. No red hair, freckles, recessive, dominant. Make sure I count those. Red hair, freckles, count that one. Red hair, no freckles, so dominant, recessive. No red hair, freckles, recessive, dominant. Whoops, make sure I keep track. And no red hair, no freckles. All right, so now if I were to total all of my tallies, I have a 9, 3 to 3 to 1 ratio. Okay. So I know that when I have a dihybrid cross, I'm always going to have a 9:3:3:1 ratio in my offspring for phenotype, for what they look like. There is no way we'd ever worry about a genotype thing. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do is try one on your own.